If you have your Bibles, we're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 14 this morning. And we've been doing a study on the fatherhood of God. And primarily, we've been talking about a story between two men that met at a park. And the story goes that there was a man by the name of Morris McNeely. He was a retired preacher. He went to the park every day to pray and watched the kids and reminded him of when his kids were little, and so he just loved going to the park. Since he was retired, he just thought it was a wonderful way to spend the afternoon. There was another man that came. His name was Ken Knight, and he had a son named Hunter, about 2 to 3 years of age. And he'd bring Hunter to the park, and they'd play. And didn't do it very often, but he did it on occasion because he knew that Hunter really enjoyed it. And so one day, in the midst of the busyness, Hunter was out playing, and Ken just happened to sit down next to Morris. And they struck up a conversation. Ken asked Morris, since he was a father, or he was older, he said, "Do you have kids?" And Morris said, "Yeah, I have 4 children. I've got 8 grandchildren, 17 great-grandchildren." And so Ken, being a new dad, he said, "Well, maybe you can teach me the secret, the wisdom of being a good father, a good dad." So Morris said, "Well, you know, everything that you need to know about being a good father, understanding the greatest example of the father that we might have is found right here on this playground." And so over the next few weeks, Morris began to teach Ken the different parts of the playground and how they applied to fatherhood. We said a few weeks ago, Morris started with the swing and talked about the power of the push and how our children need the push of encouragement or affirmation. Sometimes they need the push of admonition. Sometimes they need the push of identification. We need to remember to do that. And then we talked about last week we talked about the joy of the jungle gym and how sometimes kids, you know, we try to climb, and kids climb onto that jungle gym, but they need our support, and they need our help. And so Morris told Ken that if he came back this particular Wednesday, they decided to meet on Wednesdays every afternoon at the park, that he would teach him another lesson. So Ken was excited to get to the park that day because he had been applying the principles that Morris had been teaching, not just with Hunter, but he began to apply it in other areas of his life. He recognized that these principles were universal, so he couldn't wait to tell Morris about his experience. He began to even use them with his employees. He began to use them at work and found that they'd been successful. So Ken got to the park early that day, let Hunter go out and play, and so when Morris got there, he was a little surprised that Ken was waiting for him, and he was excited to see him. So they started talking. Ken said, "Man, I can't wait to tell you all the lessons that you've been teaching me, that power of the push. It's been fantastic. I've been using it not only with my 3-year-old, but I've been using it at work with my employees, and they seem to be responding. And that lesson that you taught me about the spring toy and the beauty of the bounce back," he said, "I've been trying to be more forgiving and understand that God has a second chance, and God's given me a second chance. And so I just can't wait to let you teach me today." So Morris said, "Well, I'm glad to hear that you've been applying the principles." So the funny thing about God's universal principles, or God's principles in the Bible, you find that really once you understand them, they do apply to every area of your life. You can use them at home, you can use them at work, and you can use them with your own spiritual life. And so Ken said, "Well, I can't wait to hear what you're going to talk about today. So what are you going to teach me today?" And so Morris paused and looked around the playground. He said, "Today I'm going to teach you about how to overcome when you get in difficult situations." He said, "Ken, do you ever find it hard being a dad? Do you ever find it difficult? And sometimes you just wish maybe you wouldn't have made that decision, or sometimes you want to give up?" Ken laughed and smiled. He said, "Yeah, I get it." He said, "You know, being a dad is the hardest thing I've ever done." He said, "I've done some pretty hard things in life, but you know, it's hard to be a parent. It's hard to balance work and family, and it's hard to always be there present for your kids and listening to them, and when they always need something, trying to provide for them, it's difficult. And so I still have all the same responsibilities I had before, and now I've got all these other responsibilities." And he said, "You know, most of the time I just feel like I'm not even making a dent. Sometimes I feel like a failure." Morris kind of smiled and laughed, and he said, "I understand." He said, "You know, I've been dad for a long time." He said, "It never gets easy. No matter how big or small your children are, whether they're young or whether they're grown." He said, "It's a difficult task." He said, "Let me teach you today about what I call the teachability of tunnels." He said, you see over there that little boy that's trying to do that little tunnel? And Ken looked over and he said, yeah, I see that little boy. Looks like he's having a blast. He said, you know, tunnels are one of the most interesting things in the playground, isn't it? So we like to crawl through them and we get into the midst of them, but sometimes, you know, I had a kid that liked to stay right in the middle of the tunnel, get right in, crawl in the middle, and then he wouldn't move. He wouldn't go out one end, he wouldn't go back out the other end. All the other kids would get frustrated with him because they were trying to get through the tunnel and that was job wasn't. You know, I got to admit, I love the tunnels. And when I go to the playground with our kids, I try to take them and so that they can always go to the tunnels. This is one of my favorite pictures. You can't really see it very well. There's Carly and Caden. They're in the tunnel together, having a good time. Matter of fact, I enjoy tunnels so much that sometimes I get in the tunnel. I get in the tunnel as well. You know, I did want to tell you, I don't want to hog all the pictures. If you've got a great picture of your kids or with you on different parts of the playground, you'll send that to me. I'll be happy to include that in the next few weeks as we talk about some of these different lessons and tunnels. But Morris said to Ken, he said, you know, there's some things that we need to learn in the tunnel while we're there. The tunnels teach us some very important aspects. And, you know, there's a story in the Bible found in Exodus chapter 14 when it said about a teachable moment that happened in a tunnel. As a matter of fact, it's one of the most important stories in Christianity. And Ken wasn't a Christian, so he wanted to hear the story. And so Morris started teaching the story about how the Israelites crossed through the Red Sea as escaped when they were escaping from Egypt. You know, that was a tunnel. And God taught his people some important things. So let's look at this passage together. Here is it found in Exodus chapter 14. I'm just going to read verses 15 through 22 this morning. I would encourage you to read the entire passage because it's got a lot of wealth of information here. But this is the story that Morris told Ken. And here it says, then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out the hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all of his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh and his chariots and his horsemen. Then the angel of God who had been traveling in front of Israel's army withdrew and went behind him. The pillar of the cloud also moved from front and stood behind him, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. And then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land, and the waters were divided. And the Israelites went through the sea on dry land, with a wall of water on their right and a wall of water on their left. Oh, I love this story. This story should be in the very fabric of our lives as Christians. It was the story that was retold time and time and time again to the people of Israel. It reminded them of so many facts and fundamental principles of their life and relationship to the Lord. And you and I, even though we're New Testament Christians, we should never forget this story. This story is the story that we hinge our faith on. It's a story that teaches us about who God is as our Father and how he helps us in difficult moments. And when we see no options and no way out, it tells us that God is there providing. He's a God that loves us and cares for us. He's a Father that sees the needs of his children and provides for us. So I don't know where you come this morning. I don't know what situation is going on in your life. I don't know what prayers you've been praying, what difficulties that you face, what hard moments that you're against. But I do know this. I do know that we serve a God and that we praise and honor a God today as our Father who cares for us and that knows our difficult moments and helps us to learn some valuable lessons in the midst of the tunnels that we're in. Well, Ken was excited to hear the story. Morris told the story with great emphasis. He was very passionate about the story. And Ken couldn't hardly believe what he was hearing about this water that just parted. He said, yeah, I've heard something about this story, but I really didn't understand what it meant. And Morris said, oh, it means more than you'll understand. And so Morris spent a few minutes just talking about his own personal faith in the Lord and how God had helped him come out of the tunnels of his life. Sometimes how he had gone and did actions and choices and decisions that led him down a path that led him into darkness, and he didn't see any way out. But it wasn't until he came to a saving relationship with the Lord that all of a sudden he was shown the light that he began to see. And he told him a few other stories of people that come through tunnels as well. He related in a few minutes the story about the Apostle Paul and how on his road to Damascus, all of a sudden this light shined so brightly that it blinded his eyes and that he couldn't see. He was in the midst of a tunnel, but God provided salvation so that he could see. He told him a story about a man by the name of Noah who had to build an ark and get into an ark as his tunnel. And for 40 days and 40 nights as God sent rain down upon the earth, and it saved Noah because Noah was able to get into the tunnel and to learn the lessons that God was trying to teach him. Here's my point to you this morning. I don't know what tunnel you're in right now. I don't know what difficulty that you face. I don't know what hardship is going on in your life. But let me just communicate to you this very important fact, that it is in the tunnels that God teaches us His fundamental truths. It is in the sad moments that God teaches us the importance of how He loves us and He cares for us. It is in the harsh moments where we see no escape that we turn in our dependence to God and we ask Him for help. And it's in those moments that God answers us. And Ken says, well, how does this relate to fathering? Morris said, well, I want to teach you just 3 simple principles that I've learned in being a dad that I think the tunnels have taught me. And they're very simple and not very deep or profound, but I think that you'll appreciate it. He said the first lesson that I want to teach you is that no matter what difficulty that you face, go forward. Go forward. You know, it's interesting here in Exodus chapter 14. He says, if you look back, that it tells us that, you know, the people turned to God and they saw this great sea in front of them. They had the Egyptians, Pharaoh, behind them, and they didn't know what to do. And so they cried out to God, right? They turned and cried out to God. And then what did God say? Did you catch that at the end of verse 14? He said, why are you crying out to me? Get moving. Go forward. Don't wait any longer. You know what you need to do. Just go. You've been released. You've been set free. You're not captive any longer. You're not a slave any longer. Go free. Go forth. You know, I love those words. Go forward. Go forward. You know, sometimes religion and Christianity has been described as a religion and belief that looks backwards. There's no forward thinking. You know, if you read the Bible over and over, if you read page after page after page, you'll see that this mentality or this principle of going forward is woven into the very fabric of almost every page of the Bible. I mean, God started it in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28. He told Adam and Eve, He says, go forth and multiply. Subdue the land. Go forward. I have set you on a course. I've told you what you need to do. Now go forward and multiply the land. And for us as New Testament Christians, Jesus did the very exact same thing. Matthew chapter 28, when He's taken up, getting ready to be taken up into heaven, the very last words that He says to His disciples, that He says to the New Testament church, is He says, go forward. Go into all nations and preach and teach and tell them about my crucifixion and my death and my resurrection. Go into all the nations and preach and baptize so that they can be saved. Go forward. You know, Morris said, you know, Ken, the thing that I've learned in life is as your parent, every day is a new day. And you've got to go forward. You can't be hung up in yesterday. You know what you need to do, and you can't be stuck there. You've got to take that freshness, that new opportunity that God has given to you, and go forward with it. I don't know where you're stuck today, but I would encourage you to remember these words as it relates to what God is trying to teach us about moving forward. You know, I like this idea of going forward. I want to share this with you about upward delegation. You know, I think sometimes as Christians we get stuck. And I love this passage. I love this verse. There's a couple of verses here I just love. And the fact is, you know, God has told us what we need to do. You know, the reality is, most of the time in life, that's true. Most of us know what we need to do. And yet sometimes we're stuck just asking because we don't like God's answer. Right? In my CEO groups not too long ago, we had a discussion around upward delegation. You ever heard of that? Upward delegation is where you have somebody that as an employee or somebody that works for you, and they don't do their work, and so they upwardly delegate it. They keep coming to you to solve their problem. They keep coming to you for the answers and for the solution. You ever have those kinds of employees? You know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, they delegate most of their work, but they delegate it upward because they don't like to get it done, and so they're kind of stuck where they're at. They're not great employees, quite honestly, right? They're the kind of employees we'd like to get rid of most of the time. And so we talked about that. But you know what I was thinking when I was reading that story is, we did the same thing with God. God has given us His Word. He's tried to teach us what to do. He told the Israelites to go free, and yet we upward delegate. Sometimes we're stuck in just praying, asking God for the same thing over and over and over and over again. God's telling you to go forward. He's telling you to move out. He says, I've given you spiritual gifts. Go forward. Go use those gifts. He says, I've given you opportunities. Go forward. Seize the opportunities that I've given to you. Opportunities to serve me. Opportunities to uplift Christ. Opportunities to tell other people about your faith. Opportunities to share with them the gospel of Jesus Christ. He says, I've given you the Word so that you can apply it and put it into your life, dealing with your sins and dealing with your issues. Go forward. Act upon what you know. Move forward, He says. The last thing to do or the best thing to do when you're stuck is keep going. God encourages us to take the first step into the promised land. And so this morning, I just want you to write down in your outline maybe an action step that you want to take over the next 7 days in your life. What is God asking you to do? What is it that you know God is communicating? What has He told you to do time and time and time and time again that He's just waiting for you to act on? Morris gave Ken that same challenge. He said, I know there's some things you know you need to be doing in your life. This story tells us that as a father, we can't put off to tomorrow. It's today. We've got to act upon it. What have you been putting off as a dad? What do you think, well, I'll get to it tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes? And pretty soon we've missed that defining moment in the life of our child because we've been so busy doing something else that we forgot to teach them, or we forgot to take them to church, or we've forgotten to share our faith, or we've forgotten to spend time with them. It's so easy, and I'll say it this way from a fatherhood perspective. The number one sin of a father is the things that he doesn't do. It's the things that he hopes to do, but he never gets done because he always thinks he can do it tomorrow. Go forward. There's a second principle in this passage that Morris related to Ken. He says, the first part is there, he says they were asking what to do, and God says, go forward. Don't just sit here and pray. Get moving. Get going. And the second part is that they had to walk through the dry land. God parted the waters, and so they had to step into the water. Matter of fact, the Bible records it this way. If you look at verses 19 and just verse 21, it says, the angel of the Lord who was going before the host of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of the cloud moved before them and stood behind them. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by the strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. They had to step into the dry land and move forward. And so the principle here is to trust God as they go out. And we've got to trust God as fathers as we teach our kids. He said, really God created our children, and He made them, He created them, He designed them, and we have to trust Him. Sometimes we want to mold and shape them, we want to make them just what we want them to be, and yet God's calling us to trust Him in the midst of it. When we're in the midst of a tunnel in our life, that's also a time to model for our children how we trust God. I've thought back as I prepared this sermon, this series about the tunnels in my life. We all face it. We've even talked about some this morning, maybe the loss of a father. Maybe it's a sin issue in our life. Maybe it's a difficulty that we face. We've all been in the midst of that Red Sea. We've all been on that dry land walking between the waters, and we've all had tunnels in our life. Times of sadness and difficulties. I believe that God wants us to trust Him in the midst of that. There are some teachable moments in the midst of our tunnels, and I just want to share with you 4 that I've learned in the midst of my tunnels today. Maybe you've learned some as well. Number one is this, that I have limitations. And because of that, I need a God who's miraculous. And I think that's one of the lessons that the Israelites learned that day in the midst of their tunnel, wasn't it? They couldn't part the water. They couldn't walk away from the Egyptians and walk onto the dry land. They knew they had limitations in life, and they needed a God of the miraculous, and God provided. Maybe the struggles that you're facing in your life right now are so hard and so difficult. Maybe the financial struggles, or your health struggles, or your mental struggles, or your relationship struggles, whatever they are, maybe they're so strong. Maybe God is trying to teach you that you can't control it. God doesn't want you to be the God of the tunnel. He just wants you to walk in the tunnel and trust Him in the midst of your difficulty and hardship. God is the God of the miraculous. And He'll help you in that midst of that tunnel if you trust Him. You know, the second thing the tunnels have taught me is that getting out of the tunnels occurs one step at a time. It occurs one step at a time. You know, I found it interesting in this passage, and this maybe is self-explanatory, but they weren't on one side of the Red Sea. I mean, God could have done anything, right? I mean, God is the God that is miraculous. He made the sun stand still. He saved Daniel from the lion's den. He had Noah build an ark and flooded the world. He could have done anything that he wanted. He could have transported the whole people of Israel from one side of the Red Sea to the other, if he wanted to. Couldn't? I mean, I believe in a God like that. He could have just said, boom, here you are, boom, there you are, gone to the promised land. He didn't. He just parted the Red Sea. He had them walk through the Red Sea one step at a time. And I think there's a lesson to learn there. Because sometimes I walk in, I put myself in the tunnel, I make a mistake or a choice or a decision, I walk away from God, and God helps me to understand as He leads me out His love for me and His providence for me and His design for me. Getting out of the tunnel takes time, one step at a time. But God will lead me, Father. The third lesson that tunnels teach me is that I can't get out of the tunnel on my own. You know, I'm the one that put myself there, right? If I could get out, I wouldn't have been there to begin with most of the time. And so I need God's help in the midst of my tunnels and my situation. So my encouragement to you is, don't try to fight through that tunnel by yourself. Don't take your pain and sorrow and difficulty and hold that all in by yourself. Let God help you, lead you, be there with you. And then the last one is that there's something important that's happening that I should pay attention. Right? The tunnels teach us. They're teachable moments in our life. And so this is a moment to pay attention. It's a moment to breathe in, to think about it for just a second. And I think God was doing that as they walked across that dry land. I mean, it took them hours to get across that land. And God was trying to teach them something in that moment. He was trying to help them to remember that He was present there. You know, too many of us, we run away from these difficult moments in life. Don't run away. Spend some moment in that tunnel listening to what God's trying to teach you, what He's trying to show you, what He's trying to help you understand. So I put on your outline just for you to think about this morning. You know, what tunnel am I currently going through? What difficulty in my life? Where am I having a hard time seeing the future? All those things classify as tunnels. Where am I at that I'm feeling uncomfortable? I'm worried, nervous. That's a tunnel. And then ask God, what are you trying to teach me in the midst of this tunnel? What are you trying to show me? And then the last lesson that Morris taught him was number 3 was to keep going. I like the way it's put in verse 22. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters being on the wall to them on the right and on their left. And they went into the sea. They kept going. They kept going. You know, the thing about Father Morris said to Ken, he said, you know, every day you have a new opportunity. Keep going. Keep persevering. Keep modeling. Keep sharing. Keep encouraging. Keep supporting. That's one of the lessons that I've learned. Sometimes he said, Morris said, Ken, quite honestly, when I have 4 kids and 8 grandkids and 17 grandchildren. Not all of them have been wonderful. Sometimes they've given me a run for my money. They've been difficult. Some children are different personalities than I've been. Every child is unique and different, and some of them don't see the world the way that I see things. It's been hard, but he said one of the lessons that I've learned is through my years is to keep going. Even when I'm not appreciated, when I'm not loved by my family or my children, he said I've learned to just keep going. And I think that's the lesson that God is trying to teach the people of Israel here in this story, is to keep going. I put on your outline about this phrase. I love this phrase. The people went into the midst of the sea on dry ground. Only God can make dry ground in the midst of a sea. I love that phrase. Isn't that wonderful? That's a wonderful meditation phrase. Right? Only God can make dry land in the midst of a sea. I began to think about this. I've been meditating on that verse for a while now, and chewing on it. And I've been thinking about how God can do amazing things if I'll just let him. Only God can take a child, and when I think there's no hope, change it, transform it, make it different. Only God can take a disobedient person and do something wonderful. Only God can make the sea have dry land. There's a great story that I read, and I put it because it's so powerful. I want to share with you about. I don't know where you are in your parenting. He said some more stuff. He said, I don't know how Hunter's going to turn out. Maybe Hunter's going to grow up and be the best child. He's going to be so loving. But there is a story in the Bible about a prodigal son. He says sometimes our children walk away. We teach them and we share with them and we invest and we give everything that we have, and sometimes they just reject it. He told you the story about the prodigal son. He says, but don't ever give up. Keep going. Keep loving. He said there's this great story about an old preacher. He said that old preacher had a child that was very disobedient, and one day his wife came in and gave him a plaque, and he left that plaque on his desk for the rest of his life, and the plaque simply read these words. Listen to this. He said the plaque read, "Never despair, child. The one you weep for the most at the mercy seat may fill your heart with the sweetest joy." Listen to that. Never despair, child. The one you weep for the most at the mercy seat may bring the sweetest joy. The whole point of that was you just never know where our children are going to turn out. It may be when they're 33, it may be when they're 63, it may be when they're 83. But maybe they'll turn into a relationship with God, they'll learn something, and all of a sudden they'll serve God in such a way that at the mercy seat in the future in heaven, we'll receive the joys and the blessings of what we've invested and what we've shared. Keep going. This is an important principle for us to learn. I'm going to tell you a quick story, and then I'll share this last thought with you. Move on. I love Caden. Caden is a great kid, and he has just blessed my life so tremendously. And really, he's pretty perfect almost in every way, quite honestly. There's only one thing that frustrates me about Caden. Now he's turning 4, he's getting a little bit more difficult. But he's been perfect for the first three and a half years for this point. Except for the diapers part. Either way. There's only one thing that really frustrates me about Kate, and Sean will tell you too. I love taking the kids to the playground. I love taking the kids to the park. That's kind of where this whole thing came from, out of my passion for playgrounds. And so I take Kate to the playground all the time. And we've just had a great time. And we've explored all the different parts of the playground. There's one thing that frustrates me about him, is when Caden gets to the playground, he likes to go into the tunnel, and he likes to sit. So, now in your private playground, that's no big deal. Like, when there's nobody around, I can sit on the park bench, I can bring my Bible, I can read it, we can wait a while he's just sitting up there in the tunnel, wherever he's at, whatever he's doing, however whatever he's doing in that tunnel is okay by me, because eventually he has to come down, right? But if you're in the midst of a busy playground, it's not a very fun thing. Because there's kids everywhere, they get frustrated with him because they're stomping all over him. They want him to go on, he's just standing in the midst of the tunnel. And so I got to tell you, last week we were there, and we went to the playground. We went down to Nationals Park. We went to see the Nationals play the Mets, right? And Jerry was in town, my father-in-law, so we all went. They had a playground there at the park, so we couldn't pass that up. So, about 7th inning stretch, I thought, well, let's go over to the playground. We'll have a good time. So I took Caden over there. There are probably 50, 60 kids, right? So he climbs up the ladder, gets in there.